It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next session, the Innovative Approaches to Wellbeing Program Design. Today, our moderator is Edythe Cook, Associate Director for Administrative Services, Student Health Center, American University, and also a regional representative to the Board of Directors of ACHA.
Good morning, everyone. Across the country, colleges and universities are looking at health and wellness programs to help students create and maintain a healthy lifestyle both inside and outside of the classroom. The goal of our panel is to provide an understanding of the various programs institutions are implementing to further the health and well-being of their students, to look at some of the innovations that we have seen in the field of well-being and trends that are on the horizon for the field, and also to discuss some of the considerations institutions need to make when trying to implement these programs. Joining me today are Deborah Beck, the Executive Director of Student Health and Health Services at the University of South Carolina. Deborah has worked in the field of college health for over 20 years, 10 of those years, and 10 years as a clinician as well. Jamie Leonard, the Director of Health Promotion and Wellbeing at the University of Virginia. Jamie has 10 years in health promotion at the University of Virginia and 8 years of public health work outside of college health. Tom, can you pronounce your last name for me?
Szigethy.
Szigethy is the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Do Well at Duke University. He's had 15 years in higher ed health promotion work at Duke, the University of Connecticut, and Eastern Connecticut University, and 15 years of social work regarding child welfare. And finally, from Dartmouth College, the Assistant Director of Health Improvement, Todd Gibbs. Todd has worked for 8 years at in college health and counseling and student wellness at Ohio State, Oregon State, and Dartmouth, and has decades of career identity exploration, including volunteer service in Ghana and Nigeria, working in an ice cream factory, assembly lines at the Lego plant, event planning, recording and performing with multiple bands, extensive youth ministry, and public library works. Thanks for all for joining us today. The first question is, how are institutions working on the ground to further the concept of well-being as it relates to college student populations, and what programs are we seeing from your areas of work?
First. I think in general, we're looking at different populations of students and different cohorts of students. The first one I would kind of gravitate to, because I got into this field really doing risk management and risk mitigation work, primarily with students who are wrestling with alcohol as an issue. And what I had thought about as we talked about all these different questions and kind of prepared for this is the different groupings of students. If a student is really in a crisis situation, it's very difficult to get them to understand and wrap their arms around a wellness promotion message. So it's prioritizing what they are dealing with, meeting them where they're at, looking at harm reduction as a wellness component, in addition to then giving them the tools to foster wellness.
And piggybacking off of what Tom mentioned, my university over the past few decades has done an amazing job working with our students that are in crisis and need additional resources, as well as our students that are on the other end of the spectrum that are maybe our hyperachievers. And what we've really started talking about in the past couple of years is we need to also focus on the vast majority of our students that are there in the middle. Those are the majority of our students. They need their well-being attended to, and we need to ensure that they are flourishing at the highest levels possible. But when we are looking at doing interventions, for example, in substance use, we really need to be looking all the way from prevention, all the way to services and support for our students in recovery. We also need to realize that when you're working on well-being issues, they are multifactorial. And so if you're looking at substance use and how that impacts people's mental health, how sleep impacts substance use and mental health. So all of these things are combined together. But I also wanted to address the second half of your question regarding our programming. And in my office, we say that we don't do programming, we do interventions. So we're really trying to do interventions that influence the culture of our university community. So we're strategic in ensuring that we're meeting our objectives, and we're also working with other departments to make sure that the work that they're already doing now has a well-being lens to it. So for example, my office has a very strong tradition in peer education. So we're working with our student financial services to develop a pilot program for them to start a peer education group that will be doing interventions and education with students on budgeting, on financial services. So that component of well-being, their financial well-being, is being assisted by student financial services, which is going to make it that much stronger than if it came out of my office, because our student financial services has that knowledge and that professional background. So for them to just be able to tweak their programming just a little bit to be looking at it through a well-being lens makes it that much more impactful.
At the University of South Carolina, one of the things that we have focused on for many years is that everything sort of has to be sustainable, and we were kind of focusing on being human-centric, making sure that we meet the students where they are, as far as wanting them to be involved. We want them to enjoy what they're doing. We want them to feel engaged and be part of the campus community. And we do that mostly by a lot of environmental changes. We want to make sure that the campus culture, not that it makes it difficult for them to be unhealthy, but it doesn't make it easy for them to be unhealthy. So we try to do our food policy. We were in the middle of that for probably 5-6 years, so we finally got our food policy implemented, which means places throughout campus, there are some that you cannot have any fried food in the areas. It's all healthy food. We were able to get our food services to do all of the nutritional information and calories and trying to get students to focus on that. So it's been more of a campus culture, smoke-free. Now we have policies where every building that is built on campus has to have lactation support in it to sort of help with that ongoing. So it's kind of continuing that environment. The nice thing that we've also been doing is all of our buildings, we've been trying to incorporate, the biophilia concept, one with nature, trying to bring things inside on all the campuses. And it was a big, I would say fight, but it was a big push to get our university, that's a traditional brick and mortar school, to have a building that we just recently opened a year ago, Center for Health and Wellbeing, mostly glass. We have indoor plants and everything that we wanted to incorporate inside the building. It's in the center of campus, and we really wanted this building to be a symbol for our campus that we were about well-being from a systemic perspective. We made the building to where students would cut through the building, and they cannot cut through the building without seeing some message of wellness. The hallways are, as you go up the stairs, it builds up to a tree from the roots, and every dimension of wellness is throughout the building, so that students, as they navigate through the building, they can kind of see that. But we also wanted to make sure that we took it one step further, and we, at the health center, we are a patient-centered medical home, and it was so cool to hear our Vice President of Student Affairs says, we want to take this medical home concept and we want to throw it through student affairs and within academia. So we've actually started that team approach care, not only within the health center with our wellness, but it's also with our admissions, advising, and our student life division. It was interesting when I was preparing to speak at this, I sent out an email to our admissions, advising, academics, campus rec, athletics, and I actually gave them a little synopsis and said, going to be pairing to talk about well-being. Can you please tell me what initiatives and programs that you are doing that would meet this criteria? Students want to be there, they're engaged, they learn something, and they actually have a high level of satisfaction of being there. And it was amazing, the email storm that I started getting from all the people throughout campus. And then it says, oh, we need to meet about this. This is great. We can do this. So all of a sudden, we were having emails sharing back and forth. So everybody realized that well-being starts from the time the students are admitted throughout their whole progression on campus and when they graduate. And one of our goals is to make sure that that continues beyond graduation so that we make them good consumers of health and well-being when they move forward. Our wellness staff, well, we should call them the well-being staff. I think I have rock stars in there because they get it. They have a high understanding of what this means to do initiatives throughout campus, from risk management to risk reduction to sleep hygiene and mental health. We have a significant Mental Health Matters campaign. But the other thing is we have designated space in our building that is called a calm oasis. So anytime during the day. Students can come in, and we see them in there. They're meditating. It could be prayer. And some of it's guided, and some of it is they could just kind of come in there and do that. So basically what we're trying to do is to create a campus culture that students feel like they're engaged in and they want to be there. So that's sort of how we're navigating through that.
I think it's a question worthy of a lot of consideration in the sense that our students are learners, and so they're going to pick up on however it is that we choose to conceptualize well-being. And I think the stakeholders who have the power to determine what that looks like on any campus are going to do a lot to shape how students understand that and experience it and maybe employ or implement it in their lives. So I know the notes I took from the first session were things like vitality, purpose, resilience, engagement, and social connections. And thinking about if we were to emphasize those things, what would that do in terms of impacting student well-being overall? I think a lot of what's happening right now, I'm not a public health professional in any way, shape, or form, but to use a very basic public health model, this idea of moving things further upstream and getting away from what I think wellness started as, which was really sort of part of the whole individual biological conception of health, to these sort of broader places where we're thinking about how do we create, the institutions I'm most interested in are the ones that are asking questions about how do we create a culture of caring on our campus. And I think that has to come from a student-centered lens. In other words, when students come to this campus, do they feel cared for here, fundamentally? And that's a piece that's really of interest to me. What are we doing that creates a space where students do feel valued? The programs that I've done, which I know we'll have a chance to talk about a little later on the panel, you know, the most important and valuable piece of data I got from it was students saying what was most valuable about this service is that someone took the time to listen to me. Over and above anything else, that's what mattered. That's what made a difference in my life. So all of the programs and all the initiatives in the world, we can pitch those at students, we can build great buildings, we can renovate our campuses. If we don't have time for fundamental human connection, then they're not going to feel cared for, regardless of what else we pitch to them. So for me, it's really thinking about how do we connect with students in a way that makes them feel cared for and supported and empowered to become who they want to be and create the lives they want to be living.
Can you tell us a little bit about the best ways to engage students in these well-being programs?
So I'll pick up on that just because it's I'm on a train now. So I'm trained as a mental health counselor, and as a mental health counselor, what I was trained to do is diagnose and treat. And then I had the opportunity to start a wellness coaching program. And I realized the first time a student sat down across from me and said, yeah, I'm here because I heard we could talk about my well-being and I could learn more about my strengths. And so I'm just here to do that. And I realized I didn't know what to do with that student. I was not trained to have that conversation, and it took me years to figure out how to get off of the path that I was on and onto a new path of I need to engage with you really differently. One of the things that I learned from the coaching literature is that coaches view every client as creative, resourceful, and whole. So for me as a starting point, when I think about the best way to engage students, it might be starting from a place of thinking of them as, in fact, being creative human beings who are resourceful, who are whole, not broken, and who can probably generate solutions to the situations they're in if we give them the time and space to talk that out a little bit. So for me, fundamentally, the skills of engaging with students come down to listening to them well and empowering them to make decisions for their lives. For me, that's been a very conscious process of stepping back from the role of being an expert, trying to equip students to view themselves as the experts in their life, as the decision makers they need, and as people capable of building lives worth living. And then there's probably more beyond that, but I'll say one more thing. Design thinking, I think, is a great approach. It helps us get to some answers that we don't have right now and that students can't articulate in terms of what they need. But what it does for us as staff is it gives us an ability to role model failure for students. So instead of telling students, hey, it's okay to fail, but then we can't let any of our programs drop, taking up a very different way of working with students where we say, you know, we're going to try something. This might work out. This might not work out. And if it doesn't, I'll own it, and you'll get to experience it and see it, and we're going to reframe that as learning. That allows us to build student-centered programs and role model failure simultaneously.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Everything that Todd just said. I think that on an individual basis, how are we helping to build wellness within students, but then students are also part of this entire community and part of all their student groups. And often what we find is they don't necessarily know how to navigate boundaries around all those different groups. You know, if I'm a member of a fraternity, I'm supposed to be a brother through and through. I'm supposed to support. I'm supposed to take on all these other problems and help all these people. And yet don't know when they should call it quits and say, what am I actually getting in return? Some of those conversations we end up having with students often is where is the energy flow? When are you in a situation where you're building your energy? And when is the area that you're exuding energy and you're expending energy? And if they can understand the difference between that, they understand whether they're in a good place where they can actually give to someone else or if they need to refuel or re-energize. We use the analogy with the car a lot of times. It's going to run out of gas as long as you keep running it. The question is if you're going to just get gas periodically or if you're going to be stuck on a highway somewhere because you're not refueling. So the program development becomes bringing in that expertise of the student. How do we keep students involved in all of it? Historically, we've had all the professionals doing workshops and lectures and PowerPoints and telling and imposing our version on the student, where we know that students who are doing well or are strong in well-being have a lot of these practices they're already doing. How do they express that and start teaching others? So one way we've gone about that is knowing that our professional resource is limited. I've got X number of staff. I'm not going to be adding to that staff load more than likely. Unless, Sue, you want to add some, that would be great. So we've set up this program so that it's not that students only request us to give programs, but they can become part of what we call moments of mindfulness, where anything that they're doing that is wellness related, they pick a day, they pick a time, and they come in every week for the semester, and they present that, and they can bring 10 of their closest friends. So group meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, knitting circle, anything that they might be doing that we can tie in with the research has to do with wellness. So there's an activity that brings them to a centered moment. By being in a surrounding of 10 other people that have like-mindedness, they're going to meet more people, the social aspect is addressed, and they have a certain behavior that's done weekly, which will then tie into some of that data component that was talked about in the last session as well, is what behaviors are we measuring, and how often do you need to be doing these behaviors? Do you have to do them twice a day? Do you do them once a week? Do you do them every month? How do we measure what level of those behaviors are effective? Which I know is for future questions. But really that kind of, the confluence of the student group membership, what is the group giving the individual, and what is the individual giving the group as it pertains to wellness?
Deborah talked about this a little bit already, but what partnerships can be forged on campuses to help develop and run these types of programs, and what structural changes might schools need to consider to further student well-being?
I think most importantly is getting our students involved, getting to our Student Government Association, our graduate students, and any student that we possibly can get involved. I know at the University of South Carolina, we have a lot of activities for our freshmen. We have our University 101. Everything is involved that a lot of those students get involved throughout campus. They start learning and navigating the campus. Then we have programs for our sophomores to make sure that they retain from freshmen to sophomores. There's a lot of things going on with their sophomore. Then all of a sudden we kind of look and we say, well, wait a minute, our freshmen and our sophomore are still actively engaged to some degree. Some are off doing other things, but then we're looking at our juniors and our seniors and our graduate students, and then we start looking at our graduate students are the highest use of our counseling center. So we're trying to focus a lot more on gaining that group of students. Since there's so much going on between our freshmen and our sophomores, we want to make sure that that is contained throughout. So we're trying to do more and more with our juniors and seniors and actually helping them to kind of also teach the freshmen and sophomore as well. We're working with faculty, try to do academic inclusion in all of the classrooms. We're hoping next year that there's going to be something required. We're still trying to hopefully it won't be a forceful thing, but we would like to get all faculty to put something in their course syllabi that talks about wellness and where people can get help, especially from a mental health perspective. Because many students, we will have a student show up to the health center or counseling center or show up to one of our wellness initiatives, and they're like, wow, I'm a junior. I've never heard about this. Is this new? And you're sitting there like, wow, no, so they're not able to find that out. So we're hoping to try to get more and more of that so that our faculty are involved in talking to students at that level. Our campaigns that we're doing on campus, we want to make sure that students of all color, religion, fraternity, the Greek system, wherever, we want a student on a poster that looks like somebody else that they know, and it's not just one branded group of students. So that has been extremely successful. And also now we're doing podcasts, and students are doing these, reaching out to other students, talking about how to get involved. And they're sort of reducing the stigma around getting help at any point in time. So there's been 4, I think the 4th one just aired, but they're awesome. And it kind of goes back with their Mental Health Matters campaign, again, focusing on that mental health as a key aspect on our campus.
For me, I just carry around the Okanagan Charter. So as far as I'm concerned, everybody is a potential partner, whether they want to be or not. Done.
Yeah, gosh, so much to say and so little time. I want to be a respectful panelist. I think the interesting question to ask here is, where are students being impacted and where do they turn for help? And then build partnerships strategically from that point. So if we know where things are really doing damage to student well-being, then that gives us a sense of maybe some partnerships that might need to be formed, and draw on our skills as being persuasive people in order to try to facilitate some of that change. And also looking to those natural connections that students already have. Where do they look for support? So I've been at Dartmouth for all of 2 weeks, so I'm not going to speak as though I know that institution intimately at this point in time, but I did look at the health data that they've gathered over the past couple of years, and it was very clear that when students are experiencing any concerns related to their mental health, the most common person they will turn to is a friend, the second most common person they will turn to is a parent. Well, those are strategic partnerships then that I think need to take place from the perspective of where do students turn for help. In terms of where they're impacted, I think that's a bigger question of what are the things that are causing them to feel anxiety or depression or loneliness or whatever that might be, and then to think really creatively about what generates that and who are the people we need to enlist in order to address some of those things. So, and then the last thing I'll say is that I think we probably need to be better about making sure that our work is for all students. I had a colleague at Oregon State who, as part of a well-being task force, said to me, well, you know, wellness is really just code for whiteness. And that was a statement that really resonated with me, and something that was not entirely a new thought, but no one had ever said it that plainly to me before. And it really challenged my conceptions of what is it that I'm promoting and for whom, and what does that tell me about where I need to be reaching out and connecting with others to make sure that this program is not reinforcing one way of doing life, but it really is a program that honors the unique needs and perspectives and resources and capacities of all people in a way that is empowering for all to pursue life as best fits them as individuals.
And I think that any way that we can align with faculty, obviously, all the different groups that everybody mentioned makes complete sense and needs to be done. But one of the pieces that we have found as we've talked about the concepts of well-being across campus is a lot of the students are gaining all that stress level through the academic course load. And the students can identify specific courses that within the first class will skyrocket their anxiety. And so we do have faculty on campus who are doing 4 or 5 minutes of meditation before the class begins, which sounds really counterintuitive to getting a lot of work done. But what they're finding as you get into the mindfulness is it actually increases the actual work you're going to accomplish, because it gets somebody to be very focused and being able to accomplish the task. So there are a multitude of ways to pull so many areas in, all that have been mentioned. But I think one of the big pieces for us is going to be very much the faculty. The other component with that is when we offer programs to students and students are facilitating those programs, we leave it open to professionals and staff. Because we don't want the students thinking, well, you're the only ones that really need this. Because the students have also said to us before that that whole perfectionism mindset has been fostered by all the staff and faculty on campus because we make it really easy to get the work done. They don't see the struggles underneath. They don't see the duck feet going under the water kind of concept. So to be able to bring in faculty and staff to a group meditation class, the students then recognize, oh, so you're also using all of these tools. It's not just that I'm defective. It's that this is something you honestly need to be successful and accomplished.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one other thing that we are just working on at our school is about our veterans. We have more and more veterans coming to Carolina and really wanting to enroll in school. Many are suffering from PTSD, and they're feeling like they don't really have enough students that are together with them. And we just realized several months ago the barrier with our veterans, the Veterans Hospital is probably within 5 miles from our campus, and our students wanted to get their care on our campus. They wanted to see our physicians, our counselors, but the VA hospital would not pay for any of the medications or anything, labs or x-rays, anything that they got through the student health center, they would not pay for because they had to go all through to the VA hospital. So we've had a couple of meetings, and it sounds very positive that we're actually going to do a memorandum of understanding with the VA hospital to where they will pay and that they will allow us to keep our veterans on our campus, see them through all of our services, and then basically either allow the billing to go through, pay for that at a reduced rate. So we're really excited about that. So we're hoping by the end of this semester we will have that process in place. And then in February, what we'd like to do is to be able to announce this for our veterans group and have a reception at our health center to kind of invite them in to let them see all the things that we have available for them from a well-being perspective. It's not just about the health center. It's not just about the counseling center. It's about all the other activities that we may have in place. We did something very similar to our GBLTQ students last year where we held a reception inside our health center to say we didn't want there to be barriers for people coming in, seeking our services, looking to see what we had on our campus. And it has been tremendous because that group of students have gotten so actively involved with us and our wellness staff and actually our nurses, our nurse practitioners, as well as our veteran students are now becoming more involved, and they're actually going out and being messengers for us that, wow, they really do care about us veterans, and we've actually had more and more coming in to see that. So those are some of the areas that we're trying to target when we start seeing these groups that feel like that they are not involved, that they're not included. We want to reach out and say, you're a critical part, and you're great messengers for us.
Can you touch a little bit about what sort of trends and how the field has changed and what resources universities might need to consider when kind of trying to keep up with these changes in the field?
I think in general, just in the last 5 years probably, but longer than that, it's been altered from just a list of items that we need to teach people about, like alcohol, sexual health, sleep, stress, like all these different tickler items that people would call up and say, I need a program on this topic, to more of a comprehensive nature of what is wellness, what is well-being, how do all these components still fit together. I see in some of the other meetings that we have in the Healthy Campus component that we're initiating, you know, when it comes to the data piece, somewhat the field is moving a little bit quicker than we're catching up with it, so to speak, because when people start talking about the data, it's so much easier to measure physical health only. BMI, cholesterol, weight, exercise, you know, those kind of pieces, nutrition, those are all the buzzwords for wellness. We have no idea how to measure spirituality, I don't think. And when we say spirituality as a dimension even, how often is it discussed on campuses? When we have students rate what dimensions are you strong in, which ones are you challenged by, spirituality is usually dead last. And we define that just as meaning and purpose, which was mentioned in the last panel as well, of where do you find fulfillment kind of concept. But it's so much more amorphous and more difficult to measure that oftentimes it gets left off the list, as well as some of the other ones that are harder to measure. Environment can be harder to measure. We can understand it anecdotally, whether our campuses are increasing the anxiousness and stressfulness or stress nature or problematic behavior, but how do you put your finger on it? And how do we, if I start talking about how you set up a room that brings you a sense of calm, it almost sounds like we're room decorators rather than we're doing wellness and we're doing real scientific work. Trying to pull from, at least where in our area, we're trying to pull from wellness definitions from cultures from around the world, because we know we're an intercultural campus. And many other cultures get this way better than America, and probably look at what we're doing thinking we're decades behind. So trying to have those concepts built in as well. What works, and how do you set up your wellness as it approaches your 5 senses? We each communicate with the world through our 5 senses, but do we think of wellness in that way? Is there an item that I can touch that's going to calm me? Think of a garden. If you're walking through a garden on a weekend where it calms you down, is there plants that I can touch and feel that make me feel better? What plants smell better? Which ones do I see that look nice? Why is it that I get attracted to certain things over other things? It's all about how we communicate with the environment and with our wellness. I think that the entire field is moving in that direction to see the comprehensive nature of it, rather than waiting until somebody is sick before we start talking to them about wellness. We want them to actually move in the correct direction rather than into the failed direction.
I found the earlier conversation about students and their readiness for college really interesting. This sense of, do they have the resilience that it takes? Are they prepared for this environment? And so I have a daughter that will be 9 weeks old tomorrow. And I've been learning a lot, as you can imagine, or as many of you probably know. And so I've been reading about parenting, and one of the articles I read said, I thought my job as a new parent was to teach sort of this child how to be human. And what I found was that my child taught me how to be human. And I would say that's been my experience. This small human being who cannot communicate with words yet pulls on the best and worst in me on a regular basis. And what I'm interested in for the sake of this discussion is the part where she pulls on the best in me. Because I didn't know that it was okay for me to be awake and tired and zombie-like at 4 a.m. changing a diaper for someone else, because of course she can't change a diaper yet because, I don't know, she's 4 weeks old. And so developmentally, she's exactly where she's supposed to be. She's a child, and she needs me to be there for her in the way that a 4-week-old needs someone to be there for her. That's how we're wired as a species. So are 17 and 18-year-olds ready and resilient and prepared for everything? Of course not. Of course they're not. They've never had this experience before in their life, and their whole life is in transition. They've just lost all of the close relationships that they've ever had. They need to learn how to manage a whole bunch of life skills that they've never had to do before. Ideally, the challenge of the learning environment is going to go up significantly from whatever it is they've done before. All of the students who were the best in their schools at whatever activity are now suddenly middle of the pack because the competition has gotten that much stronger. So of course they're not ready. On top of that, I would say those transitions have probably always been true. But on top of that, the context of the world has changed for them. And there's lots of things I could point to there, but I think the easiest one is technology. That's a radically different space from what college was when this gray-haired person went off to undergrad 17 hours away from home. I made relationships because I had to, because there was no phone through which I could connect with people everywhere else. So, trying to think of where I was going with all of this, but when we think about student well-being and how it's changing, and is that what the question was? Yeah, okay. Thinking about my kid, and now I'm thinking about students. All the people that I've cared about have taken the place of the point in my mind. That's it. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be there for them in the way that they need us to show up for them in these developmental spaces, so that by the time they're done, they're ready for all of the challenges that will come at the next step that they won't be fully prepared for, but they'll be ready to take that first step. So meeting them where they're at, helping them move further on that journey and helping them get where they need to go, I think is in many ways that work that we're all about.
You know, the 20 years that I've been in college health, it's changed so dramatically on campus. It used to be, you know, it was very somewhat simple. You know, it was a lot about physical education, nutrition, activity. It was fairly simple. And this past couple of months, our campus has been focusing more on risk management and looking at, you know, we've had the 1,000-year flood. We had another hurricane come through with all the flooding. And then we also find ourselves with this mental health crisis on our campus where we unfortunately have students that die by suicide, one just this past week. So we're having to look at the environmental of our parking decks, our high rises. How are we going to keep our students safe? So some of those things I feel like go way into that well-being. The other thing is risk assessment, actually training our campus to recognize students of concern and figure out what do we do with these students of concern? How do you navigate through that process? And when students find out that you're doing these things and students find out that you have an emergency management team on your campus that is looking at all those safety factors, they kind of take a step back and say, what? So I think that they are surprised that we are looking at the greater benefit, and I think that all ties into the health and well-being on our campus, is that we still have those things and getting more and more students involved and wanting to be part of that risk assessment. And so I think that has been an eye-opening over the past year, 2 years, that it's not just kind of keeping them healthy from all the other factors, but it's keeping an active shooter out, it's keeping everything safe so that we can respond in an appropriate way if those things happen. So I think that has really changed dramatically.
And what thought that comes to mind when we talk about bystander intervention that we do, and that we're constantly teaching students and asking them to look out for each other and take care of each other. And I think the piece that we don't necessarily do as well in higher ed is how do you take care of yourself as you're being a caretaker? Because if you think about, so the topic of alcohol, if you think about the students who are making the call to the medical help for somebody who drank too much, and if that sober student is doing that every weekend, 2 or 3 times a weekend, how is their academic suffering because they've been taking care of everybody else? And are we teaching them boundaries around caretaking and saying, you know, you also have to prioritize yourself in this process. You can't be the person 100% taking care of everyone because you also have to pass academics. So I think that's the next chapter of some of the bystander messaging after we have people paying attention and taking care of each other. How do you draw those healthy boundaries so that you're not 24/7 doing that activity at the loss of what you're here for?
And what role does data and other evidence-based components play in developing a health-promoting university, in your opinions?
Well, I have the good fortune of coming into or inheriting a department that was very data-driven. So we have decades worth of data that we've been collecting in our Office of Health Promotion and continue to do so. And so anytime we're doing an intervention, it is with that data in mind. So internally, we use that data in many different ways, one of which is to identify those high-risk areas, identify areas of concern where we know that we need to put some focus in, but also we want to identify the areas that our students are also thriving, because we're doing something well there. So we want to continue to support that. So we don't want to lose sight of those good parts too. We also use that data to track, are we moving the needle at all? Are our interventions helping with those behavior changes? We use the data in order to benchmark against other universities. So if we see a blip in the data, is that just something that we're seeing on our campus, or is that a national trend? And that gives us a lot of information. And then we also use our data to look for emerging trends. So a few years ago, I wanted to start looking at what were our students doing in the realm of well-being? What kind of activities were they doing to support their own well-being, if anything at all? And what I found was actually that 51% of our students are doing some sort of meditation, mindfulness, or breathing. 51%. I mean, this is a new generation, right? I was blown away by that. And if I hadn't asked those questions, I would have come in under a much different angle. But what I learned from that was that our students value their well-being, they know something about it, and they're actively practicing things to support their well-being. So I can look at those 50% of those students and continue to support them on that journey. And then I can also look at the other 50% of the students and try to figure out how to get them either on that path, or maybe that mindfulness and the meditation component isn't the part of well-being that they feel comfortable with. So where is it can we plug them in? So for us, that data component is really important. And you know, we're not at George Mason level. We're not at Wake Forest, who's doing wonderful research in this area. But again, you know, I just threw a handful of questions on my annual assessment just to start picking away at it a little bit, give me a little bit of a view. But I also want to point to what we do externally with our data. We don't want to collect it and then just sit on it as an office. So we are very strategic in how we are marketing our data. We put it into very beautiful, colorful graphs and charts that make it easy to read. So we're not just passing around an Excel spreadsheet. We want it to be engaging for our stakeholders. And then we look around our campus community and figure out which stakeholders do we think need to see this. And then we make sure that we're pulling some of that data that is relevant to them. So we want to look at volunteerism. We want to see how engaged our students are. Well, we have some questions around volunteerism, so we make sure that we pull that, specifically targeting when we go talk to that office about the data. Because if we want partnerships to get folks on board with working on well-being issues of our students, we need to make it relevant for that specific office. So externally is, I believe, just as important as internally of what we're doing with our data components.
I think I'll make a brief comment here, since we are the panel that is supposedly talking about innovation and well-being. That data becomes a really interesting concept in that process of innovation, from the sense that maybe it informs us where innovation is needed, but that also we might have to move beyond the scope of the evidence-based practices that exist in order to try something new. So I think we need to make space for practice-informed evidence in our work. In other words, if we really want to move a needle, if we really want to try something new, then we're going to be venturing into uncharted waters, and we need to be thoughtful about how do we gather data as we go to help us understand what we're doing, is it accomplishing what we want, and sort of be at the forefront of building the evidence-based practices of the future, moving the field forward really in a very tangible and intentional way. So yes, absolutely evidence-based practices, but also some practice-based evidence to keep us moving in a direction where we really can move a needle and innovate new services and interventions that will ultimately promote student well-being and success.
I would say data, as everybody would probably agree, gives us direction. It tells us what we need to address with what student cohorts and with what student populations. I would love to see the day where it's much more integrated across different centers. It would be ideal when CAPS is seeing a wave of issue in one particular semester that they have the data to be able to transfer over to health promotion, then it could get incorporated right into programs. Rather than each center has to pursue its own data and kind of sift through it all. We had an example, I think a little bit easier with student health, where we had a huge flu outbreak last year, and then we could partner with them on health promotion on how do we address this in the instance. A little more difficult when it comes to all the mental health components that come out. But the data certainly drives everything that we do. It's the storytelling that becomes a little more laborious. How do we translate all that data into a story that people are going to want to hear? Because I know that when I start really measuring, and as Sue said, we have tons of data. And I can walk through all of that and really talk it through, but people who are not doing the work I'm doing are not going to be as interested in hearing every little nuance. So it's really, what I have found most helpful is when I'm sitting with our assessment person and we talk it through, and she'll point out what resonates with her as a person who doesn't do the work. When you made this statement, this is what really stood out. So let's promote that within the story. So it's just hearing from different people not doing the work to figure out what are the components they're going to hear within the story that makes it land.
I think it was really important what Todd said about it may not be evidence-based, but it will be 5 years from now or 3 years from now, because the generations of students are changing and what meets their needs 10 years ago would certainly be very different. So I really like that concept. And also looking at not only just what's going on our campus, but looking at the perceptions that students have about your campus culture. So looking at our campus, I feel like our campus is very well integrated with mental health. I think we do a really good job, but when you look at students' perspectives, do they really have that perspective, and what do they feel that's there? So looking at that and then using that data to guide your programming based on the differences in perception of what students see your campus culture as being healthy and well-being, I think is really important.
And when we were sort of preparing for this panel, you know, I mentioned that all the panelists are from some larger schools. So I guess my question for you is, how can you bring some of the things that you're doing at your campuses? How can smaller schools, you know, do those things with limited resources?
I think simply put, it's a question of scale. A lot of the work or the promotional component, it doesn't have to be expensive. And it's how do we bring students in to talk about these topics and give them the space and the opportunity to practice the topics. And a lot of it I find is redundancy of verbal marketing. The more I have similar conversations with different constituents across the whole community, we can get the movement occurring and happening. And that happens whether it's a large school or a small school. But it's finding your cohort of people that are going to help you to promote what the issues are that you need to get out there as well.
Yes, for me, it's all about those relationships and the relationship building. And I think oftentimes smaller schools look at larger schools and say, you have this many staff in each of these different offices. But one of the things that I think smaller schools have are just those organic relationships that people have. So you meet somebody from an office of health promotion from a smaller school, and they're also teaching a exercise class in the rec center, and they're helping with residence life during move-in weekend, and you know they're friends with their colleagues across campus, and so those kinds of conversations about this well-being integration, I think, happen or can happen a lot more organically.
Again, I've only been at Dartmouth for 2 weeks, so so I'm at a smaller institution. I went to a smaller institution as an undergrad way back when. For me, I think what this brings up in my mind is the question of, is this something we do for students or is this something we do with students? Because if it's something we do with students, then the resources are there regardless of the size of the school. And it's been interesting for me that in my first 2 weeks of onboarding, the director of our office has given me student contacts as important meetings to take as part of my onboarding process. And so I've met with a second-year student who is the head of the Mental Health Student Union, which is a newly recognized student group that's advocating for mental health at Dartmouth, as a strategic partnership to move things forward for our office. And that to me says, well, gosh, we've got all the resources we need, and that we're a very well-resourced office regardless. But I think if we can enlist students in our work in a meaningful way, then we can continue to be creative and innovative regardless of how the institution is resourced.
Before coming to a large school, I did work at a smaller university, and it was extremely difficult to find money and resources to be able to expand what we knew we wanted to have for our students. And I think, fortunately, there were some larger schools in our area that would team up with us that wanted to do some benchmarking that worked out really well. Then when I came to USC, and you mean we have money for that? You mean we can actually do these things? So it was very different between those two schools, but I've never lost sight of that, especially being at a community college and kind of working the way up, is that you can partner with these smaller schools. There's a couple of schools in South Carolina that we partner with and that we're constantly going down to their area. We talk to them, we work with their staff, we do things, we share things. So I think teaming up with these smaller schools would be really, really important, and sharing your resources. And it may not be items, it may be just resources to go down and sit and talk and have those conversations. And that has been very effective in some of the smaller schools in South Carolina.
My I think that is all the time we have, so I want to thank our panelists for joining us and everybody in the audience, as well as the people who are live streaming. Thank you.